ask everybody's attention for just a minute. We're about ready to start, but I had two things that I wanted to mention before we got on camera. Is if you when you're out in the public, you are not speaking. Too much information and won't be you might be partial and not object. Matt, are you going to start our camera? It's 6:31, so we got to be started. If you would join me in the flag salute, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And with that, adjustments to the agenda?
Yes, 7 new business, staff resignations. You can remove Monica Bowring, she's going to come back as a custodian at Somerset. You can add Rebecca Ekier and Richard Berthium. Rebecca was in Ed Tech 3 at high school, and Richard was a custodian at the middle school, high school. And an appointment would be Derek Swanson in Tech 1, special ed at the middle school.
Moving along, approval of minutes for the September 13th meeting.
So moved.
Jason? Second. Melissa? We have a motion and second on the floor. Any discussion on that motion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? It is unanimous. Moving along to public comment. If there is anybody in the audience that would like to address the board, this is the time to do so. Moving along. Reading of communications. Administrative communications. I believe we had report, oh no, it is in our packet. Hopefully everybody had a chance to read it. Superintendent and board communications.
I don't have any communications.
I gave my spiel a minute ago, so I don't have any either. Reports.
Probably a lot of my report will come down through committees as usual. I will say couple things. If you saw the email on the MSMA Fall Conference, October 27th and 28th, and look at the list of clinics, I will pass this around as the meeting goes on, but if you want to sign up, please let Evelyn and I know. It's a great opportunity to get a chance to go there if you can. I realize that a lot of you work during those days, but just the wealth of information, learning from other board members. Some of the board members here could probably speak to this as well, who go each year, but there is a wealth of information in those conferences, and you get a chance to get free advice a lot of times from our attorneys who do certain workshops. And I can also listen to Brandon Isaacson and a couple other different attorneys to get their perspective. good learning opportunity, but I realize you all have very busy schedules and it's hard to get to. But if you ever want to do that, even in a year coming down the road, fall conference, especially getting back in person, would really be a nice activity. Superintendents go the day before. We have a keynote speaker, and we do some of our work as superintendents, and then I think the same speaker is going to come over usually and does the keynote for conference. So again, that's there, and I'll send this around.
I have gone many times, and it really is worth it because they have speakers that, national speakers that come in, and they always have hot button issues that they discuss. And so it's worth it. If you have the opportunity, please let Mike know.
The other thing is we're going to do some meeting switches. We'll talk about it more at the end of the meeting, but just to start putting it in your head, with the election coming up on the 8th, that will be a board meeting, and we won't have that. What we're going to do is switch finance to the board, and then try to, that's the 15th, right? And then go for the 14th for finance. So see if those things work for you in the back of your head right now, and then we'll send a reminder out, and we'll also remind you at the end of the meeting.
Everybody needs to get out and vote.
Yeah.
No matter what, vote.
Last thing that I guess it would be a communication, also be a report, is that the State Board of Education would like to have a meeting here in their December meeting, which is kind of a neat idea. Obviously, we have a new school, so I think they want to come and check out the schools that they support, and that will be December 14th. I'll be working out logistics with Andrew and Mary, but it's basically during the day. They come from 9 to noon and do some of their work. Then we're going to provide them lunch from 12 to 1, and then they have a public meeting, which will be streamed from 1 to 3. So I've never had actually the Board of Education come to one of my schools, so I think it's kind of a neat idea for them to come. It's obviously it's open to public as well, but the woman who I've been working with says not a lot of public come, unless I guess maybe you're trying to petition for a superintendent's agreement to be overruled or something like that. So that's kind of a neat idea. There will be some logistics in terms of, I think we'll try to put them in that classroom there and be able to see this room and then be close to the cafeteria, but I do have to work out some logistics with Mary and Ange. It's kind of neat. So most everything else that will probably come up will be through committee.
That's all on building use.
We'll make sure that they do.
Okay, Mark. Enough said, moving on. Reports of special committees, budget and finance.
So we met on the 20th of September. We reviewed August financials. It's obviously for the report early in the year, so there's not a lot of expenditures being processed. We discussed the bus purchases that we had agreed to do in last year's budget process, I believe. Joe had found a company in a bank and it secured us a really good rate on those, so we agreed to move forward with those again. We did go into federal grants, especially concerning around COVID grants and how those are starting to wind down and come to ends, and things that are being funded with them, what can we survive with, what do we really need. We want to start talking about those before we get into budget season. And we have a new auditor starting this year, so like Joe said, that's really labor intensive with them having to gather everything where they haven't audited us before. So there'll be more information coming on that as the year goes on. But outside of that, we'll be moving the next meeting to the 14th, which is a Monday.
Any questions for budget and finance?
Yeah, there was also a discussion about the implications to the budget for the mowing of the field crossing.
Apologies, yes.
I'd like the minutes to reflect that, please.
Okay.
Why did we change audit firms? Was it just, did we have a problem with the last one?
I think it was just time for us to put it back out to bid.
Yeah, the other one we'd had for 4 or 5 years, and they were ready to say, we don't really, we'll do you 1 more year, but we really have enough business, and they were ready to kind of say, we're done. And this one, when we went out to the bid packet, they were significantly lower than our other auditor, and they also do a lot of schools and a lot of communities around the area, so we were about ready to just be kind of forced out of our other one, and then this one came along. And they were here last week. They do a lot of stuff that's virtual, but you know, they're more thorough, so it's going to give us a different look at some of the things that we may not have, you know, it's typical. You know, Jen would come along and see different things, but she also knew a lot of our procedures, and then so this is a whole fresh look with a new set of eyes, and it's been labor intensive for Joe. He's had to send a lot of files to these people, and he was here for a couple of days, and he's, like I said, pushing it out to a lot of his other accountants, and it'll give us a fresh look. So it was time, because it was 5 or 6 years, and we probably should have a fresh look every 4 or 5 years. And basically, Jen was like, "You guys have been a good client, but I got plenty of business, and to let people go."
Any other questions? Moving along. Building.
Okay, we met on the 14th, right after the last board meeting. We'll meet again tomorrow. So, y'all come. We looked at the real estate proposals for the old superintendent's office. And did we ever get a response from Newport?
Yes, Newport said they appreciated the fact that we would offer to them, but they are not interested.
All right, so it will go up for commercial market.
It's on the market.
got a nice for sale sign out in front of it, so. Project updates, you'll notice a large number of those. A lot of those have to do with ventilation that were updated over the last few. When it says there's graphics to be completed, that's actually computer interface, that's not pictures. And then, let's see, some of the other stuff there was the well water treatment out at Somerset, which is to getting the water piping into the new building. The building is built, and then they will put up the control for the water treatment stuff so that we will not be using the high salt water that comes out of their municipal pipes, or at least not as much of it. Football lighting was discussed. We'll also be discussing that again tomorrow. A lot of this has been given over to Simon for his continued work. Football field fencing between the shack and the gate. Anything happen?
I'm not sure if that got repaired or not.
Okay.
Check on that.
And then field maintenance for the Etna Dixmont field. After the board meeting, we had moved things forward, and that did get mowed. And then the other question was at Etna Dixmont gates. So facilities is getting a combination lock that will, yes, Jane?
Yeah, the combination lock is on, and as parents, we put it in the newsletter, and as parents are emailing us, I'm sending the combination lock, the code to them and the directions. It's kind of a weird little lock. But, so I would say maybe 20 families might have a combination.
Okay. And then the other thing that we noted about it in Dixmont was the drop-off circle, which used to be the bus circle, among other things, is really chewed up and heaved. So it's so we're going to look at options for how to improve that, so that it's a little less wearing on people's vehicles. And then the other thing that came up was a discussion of the name of Etna Dixmont School, because now it includes Plymouth. And so the suggestion was to poll the residents of the towns and see what comes out of that.
That's what we did the last time. I think that has to be, I think it's back on the agenda tomorrow, just to make sure I'm perfectly clear on how we want to go through that, because Jessica did have a good idea about sending some type of a letter, but the language has to be put out there properly, and I think some people are going to accept it and just say, let's add Plymouth, and then there's some people who are going to say, well, we went through all these other renaming, do we honor that? So I think it needs to, I just want to be clear when I come out of that, how we're going to proceed, whether it's tomorrow night or even if people have opinions tonight.
We, with that naming committee, we did surveys and we did, all kinds of things. And it was really quite extensive, so I thought we did change.
Only informally.
Any questions for Chris?
What's going on with all the glass in the doors here?
Okay, so this was the last, so we've accepted this whole building except for the doors because the doors have had some problems. These large doors are cement. They're from California, and they weren't right. As you know, you could have looked through that door before. So it's taken us an act of getting our attorneys involved and Nixon O'Day's attorneys involved, and also Flame built the doors over in California. So finally, this last week, we had a representative from Flame actually watch American Glass put the doors in, and he was here as a consulting basis. So these doors are finally, that they're tight, you'll still see them, but now they actually close, they open as they should, and the gasket is complete. So that was one major thing, because they had to have a lift to take these doors out, because it's extremely heavy, and we've got them put back in correctly. We've also had a punch list of the bases of the doors. You'll see sometimes at the bottom has pushed through. Well, finally, after months and months and years of figuring this out, you'll see now that they're cut and flush with the bottom so that the mechanism can stop. So basically what we've done is we've finally gotten American Glass back here, who's the subcontractor under Nickerson O'Day, and hopefully put a lot of these doors issues to rest. But there's been a lot of activity over the last couple of weeks to try to get that done. But it took us going to court and actually having to have 3 attorneys sit up in a Zoom meeting and say this needs to be fixed because it's not safe and like I said, it's not energy efficient when you can sit and look at these doors and walk through. So honestly, we're getting to the end of that last punch list, and these doors were a big piece of that
Thank you.
project.
So just because the football field is going to be back in tomorrow night, I wanted to add, over the weekend, I was actually at a 3-4 football game. And we have that piece of like canvas or carpet that goes over the track. But a lot of people, especially players wearing cleats, not paying attention to it, teams from not here, but, from Lincoln, what have you. And I was wondering if there was some sort of signage we could get to put on maybe the fence before they cross onto the track to stay on that, because there was a lot of foot traffic and cleat traffic on the track this weekend.
And to add to that, maybe even some kind of like temporary fencing that can just set on it so it's not like,
Right, you just have that walkway.
that direction.
Right.
Are we maybe gonna invite Simon or grab some details from him as to what's transpired over the last month?
Simon and I may actually meet with somebody who indirectly came through Chris, and then I also have talked to Jack, who was from Oak Point, who is our civil engineer through the project, and he's recently done another project, so I'll be bringing some information, hopefully some financial numbers to that kind of process. And, Simon just come on board, and this has been something that's sitting there, so it's kind of a learning experience for him, but I helped out too because I know 2 of the contractors, and so hopefully we'll have some very concrete information about it.
Any other questions? Moving along. And we go to education.
Yep, we had a presentation from the IBEW, George Howe and Kara Flannery, who actually used to work for the district, and Mrs. Neto were there to talk about a pretty exciting, actually 2 programs that they're doing over at the old elementary school that the IBEW took over, put a lot of money into. One of them is basically it's like a feeder program for all the trades. It's an opportunity for several high school students from Nokomis to come to go over there. I think she said twice a week, 2 days a week, every other day, and essentially get some hands-on opportunities in several different trades. So even though the IBEW focuses on electricity, they're bringing in pipe fitters and plumbers and different construction trades to try to give the students an opportunity to see what opportunities there are out there. And they obviously focus on electricity. They also have an actual apprenticeship program that they are hoping to ramp up involvement from the Nokomis students in, that actually focuses on electricity, so that as soon as, actually before the students graduate from Nokomis with their diploma, they can actually be out in the field working with some of the contractors that work for IBEW and some of the companies that they contract out to. So it was actually really interesting. I think that's basically all the details are in it in terms of number of students. There's 20 students participating in the MC3, which is the first program I mentioned. But all the details are in this building, and there was also kind of a, I'll say a light ask to maybe eventually get a tour of that facility, since we do have some students going over there. So that's the end of my report.
Just a point on that is one of the things that they discussed was it's not just for students, that they actually have people that are making career changes that are community-involved people that are even in their 40s that have started this apprenticeship program, and the feedback from some of the people attending the program is stellar, so it's really exciting to see that this is local.
It was very interesting. Ted?
Is this program open to Tri-County students also?
It's open to several students, but Nokomis sends the most students. And the other thing that Mary said was actually that the MC3 program, the first one, actually gives kids who might end up going to Tri-County sort of an introductory way to see what am I interested in that I might be able to focus on up there, as well as she pointed out several times the importance of seeing what they're not interested in, what they do not like to do.
You know, we're the first school in the state that's done this, and it's really primarily for our Nokomis kids.
I think he wants to expand it,
Yes.
not just within Nokomis, but this is sort of a pilot, I think.
Any other questions? Moving along to policy.
So, policy committee met and had a very long and vibrant meeting. We reviewed the community use of facilities, building use agreement form, and a few other aspects of that, and looked at Maine School Management Association sample policy regarding that, and I believe that we're going to be discussing it at our next meeting again. In terms of the highlights of that, I think there was maybe not 100% agreement, but that some of the language in the Maine School Management Association sample policy, while it may have been reflected in some parts of RSU 19 policy, there was some interest in adopting a newer policy that made more explicit some of the community use of facilities and how it was handled. We also discussed and agreed to present for first reading student dress code, a new policy, JICA, and should we, in that order, make a motion to?
You can take them together if you like, or it's first reading.
That would be the only one for first reading?
Accounts payable.
Oh, the accounts payable. So anyways, we recommended for first reading to adopt the student dress code, which would update a fairly old student dress code that was inherited from the SAD 48. And then we also reviewed a new job description for accounts payable account clerk.
Are you making that motion?
And I would make a motion that we accept for first reading the student dress code.
There is a motion and a second on the floor. Any discussion? Yes.
Under Article A, I think, why do we have to stipulate excluding mask mandate for COVID? Why can't we just put medical requirements or something along those lines? Like, I don't think we need to put would recommend taking that out and making it a blanket statement for medical purposes.
Just leave medical purposes.
Yeah. And just because if this is going to be something we're going to adopt, hopefully we're not going to be in this world forever, and that should, I think, go away. And then I'm wondering what the correlation to baseball caps is to this, like if we're trying to be updated with the times, like it's not you go to your father's kitchen table and take your hat off 1940 anymore. So I'm just curious to why we still have that in an updated policy.
I could answer. My understanding, based on the conversation, was that, and there may be some different interpretations, but that in Article A, the main focus of that is to prevent people from hiding their identity, such that wearing a hat that was meant to conceal your identity, or wearing any article of clothing that was meant to make it so that you couldn't identify yourself. That was how I believe that was
But
interpreted.
if it's being worn appropriately, their entire face is still showing, and I think that's the difference. And if we're allowing someone to wear a face mask in school that is not having medical purpose because it's their choice, then why are we differentiating that you can't wear something on your head and it's not covering your face if it's an identification issue?
Mary.
I think, Jess, what the differential was, like at the high school, I said, we've kind of let the, those that want the hat will go. Like, it wasn't working angst, it was creating to wear a hat. But at the middle school level, the maturity level of students, like, there's just a lot of fooling around on hats, knocking kids' hat, knocking it off, taking the hat, throwing it. I think they want it to be, at that age level, a little more, Anne should speak to that. I think for us, our kids are a little more mature, swimming is like a school appropriate hat.
Right.
They're not using it to like pull it down over their face during class when the teacher's trying to talk with them. It's kind of like people here. Baseball, it's the type hat, fake, we're not going to restrict that. So I think we felt the language gave some room for some age-appropriate differentiation.
But if you look at this, it doesn't say what you're saying. This is just like this is against policy, so.
I interpret it said it's like they're not supposed to use it if it, kind of deters from identifying them, like.
Yeah.
Right, I'll speak to this. We had that same question come up because I think it can be interpreted both ways. If you really take it word for word, it is saying that they're only allowed if they, deter from identification. So it's not saying that they're not allowed, it's saying they're not allowed if it deters from clear identification. But I think it is
Yeah, it's
worded
catchy wording, so
Yeah.
that's why I was curious.
Jason.
Two things. I know I'm archaic, but I don't believe hats should be worn inside. And Article B, promote use of tobacco, alcohol, drugs, or weapons. Are we going to, I hate to pull it out, but Second Amendment, are we, if anything promotes the Second Amendment, are we going to crack down on stuff like that on your clothing?
Someone can deter that as hate speech too, so you have the same questions I do. I mean, because what
That's not
offends
hate
me
speech.
might not offend somebody else, but I'm not administration either, so I just think, there's a lot of really broad interpretations here, so where are we gonna go as far as disciplinary actions, because that is so
I think that's why the administration can take a look at that and say, this is inflammatory, it's been a disruption, and it's not okay, or else this is, it's not bothering somebody. And again, this is where our beliefs may be different, but it's all crossing that borderline where I'm starting to offend somebody, and the principals have to have that conversation and deal with it.
I'm generally not in favor of subjective language in policy, unless you're not going to enforce it. So under Article H, the The words appropriately, excessive, reasonably, and excessively are all subjective. So you're asking for arguments from parents. So if you're that concerned about it, I think you need to put in actual language that's measurable, which I would recommend against, but that's all subjective. That's my point. So I would look at that.
David?
Question on Article A about the hoods. This means if someone's cold, they can't put it on.
Bill, it's when you take a hood and you pull it down so close that you can walk around the school like this and we have no idea who you are. If they're cold, and you can identify who it is, that's not what that's doing.
So that's kind of subjective too.
Yep. And
I think a change of wording might be in order for A. Basically, just to cover the fact, any clothing worn for the purpose of deterring identification versus calling out specific clothing, more the action than the clothing, I think is what it's trying to prevent.
This is gonna be a policy, and as far as I can tell, the policies are supposed to be followed at every school. There's nothing in here that says the administration can make a decision, you know. So if we say no hats, it can't be, well, you can wear a hat at the middle school, but you can't, you can wear a hat at the high school, but not at the middle school. Because I know for my 8th grader last year, it bothered him to think that in 8th grade he couldn't wear a hat, but in high school he could. I mean, I think that it either needs to be across the board, or we need to have wording in here that says, you know, per the administrator's, building administrator, you know?
well, I see that on the second paragraph, guidelines for student dress should be developed and enforced by the administration of individual schools.
Right.
So we had this conversation because Angela has that set of expectations that she doesn't want blankets where kids are running down the classroom with blankets on because they're using them for capes and it's disruptive. Where Mary could have a kid who's cold and has a blanket in the classroom and she's going to say that's okay. Angela's going to say in her handbook, hats are not allowed in middle school because unless you're participating in a day that you've paid to wear your hat, because then you're not going to flick it off somebody's head, you're not going to take it and run around the cafeteria with it, you're just going to let somebody wear the hat. Mary's kids go to Tri-County, they're in and out of the building, they're respectful, they're responsible with their hats, they're not smashing each other with them, they're not knocking them off each other. So, and then I don't even know, you know, if it's a problem for, you know, Ellen and Jane, they're going to take it at their level. So I think that paragraph, the first sentence in that paragraph allows the administrators to do this, because again, if you want Simon and Mary to take a measuring stick and make sure every piece of clothing is absolutely appropriate, that's what they're going to do all day long, unless they can take this and say that is an inappropriate thing. You're going to have that conversation with that kid. You're not going to try to denigrate them or disrespect them in any way, and you're going to have that conversation. Angela's going to have some guidelines in hers that says some of these things are still a problem as a kid's developmentally not able to discern, you know, what it is that's bothering them and disrupting. Remember, all these dress codes go back to whatever, you know, our first premise was what interrupts the education that's going on in the classroom. If we're so focused on me wearing my Mr. Rogers shirt and somebody else not wearing my Mr. Rogers shirt, we don't want to waste all day long having that conversation. This is one of your toughest policies you're going to put through. I like it when people have specific recommendations, but probably it should be done at that committee level, because 19 of us could all sit here and discuss this until 10 o'clock.
And that was my next conversation. We can vote no, and it go back to policy, or we can vote yes, and it come to us for second reading.
With the recommendations that we brought forward.
Right.
Can I just have a correction to the minutes? I was actually excused and not present. I'm under both.
So, Paul,
A couple things I've heard from a lot of people. Thing that Mike just said was all the time it would consume to try to police this thing. Who's got a hat, who don't have a hat? What is wrong with us saying no hats? What is wrong with us saying number H, letter H? Bras, tank tops, and visible waistbands do not constitute excessive exposure. This board can come to that rational conclusion that that's okay. This is one of the most contentious issues off and on throughout the country. And we're gonna throw it through first reading like a blink of an eye. This thing needs to be worked on and worked on hard. Let's take all the extraneous stuff away from the teachers that they have to, talk about midriffs and underwear and bras. The simple solution, you know what I'm gonna say, is school uniforms. I'm sure there's a vast number of people here that don't play that game. We're picking out what's a hat, what's not a hat, what's underwear, what's not underwear. These people that run these schools got a ton of things to do. And if you want to absolve themselves of a huge problem, you get into the idea that school uniforms have some merit and not going to be splitting hairs. This policy needs to be worked on extensively, not slid through in a blink of an eye for a first read. If it's something you believe in, you take every action there is, and that would be to turn it down as a first read if it's something you believe in. You should believe in it. When is the school board going to take back the school to some level with these type of issues?
David.
Okay, again, on the second, I know you're trying to get through this, but I don't attend this committee and I won't be attending it. So on the second paragraph, talking about the guidelines for student dress, it talks about this manner free from discrimination on the basis of race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity. Is rainbow clothing going to be considered, something to do with gender expression or identity or anything like that? Just something that needs to be considered.
Anything else? If not, we will bring it to a vote. All those in favor of putting the policy on first reading? Those opposed?
Are we allowed to vote against our own motion?
Yep. So, it fails, and it goes back to committee.
Moving on.
So does that mean that the job description fails as well?
It does, but he could make a motion to...
Point of order, his original motion did not include the second one. It specifically
Oh.
said the first one.
I'm sorry.
You suggested it, but we never made it that far.
Okay. So would you like to make a motion?
I would make a motion that we approve the accounts payable, accounts clerk.
Do I hear a second? Motion and a second on the floor. Any discussion on,
That's approved for first reading, correct?
this would be...
Thank you.
Right.
Just as you say.
Any other discussion?
And we already have an accounts payable accounting clerk, don't we?
We had a different person, well, we had a split position. Now this is straight up.
All those in favor of first reading? Do I hear any opposed? It's unanimous. Moving on, second reading. And the policies are bylaws for board of directors and also policy adoption procedure. Do I hear a motion?
I would make a motion that we accept for second reading. Do we have that? Oh, that we accept for second reading changes to the bylaws of the board of directors and small change to the policy adoption procedure.
motion and second on the floor. Any discussion on the motion? Ryan?
I would amend the motion to state that we are accepting these as presented.
Thank you. Do I hear a second on the amendment?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on the amendment?
I just wanted to, so, just to make clear, I think the point of this is that within our policies, there is contradictory language that guides the policy adoption procedure. And within the bylaws, it states that it requires I believe it's a 2/3 of the weighted votes of the entirety of the school board in order to adopt policy. Further along in the policy adoption procedures, there's a couple different places where it basically contradicts that original bylaw. Presumably, these were a policy adoption procedure that was put in place according to the bylaws by the board of RSU 19. And specifically, what it says, I'll have to find it exactly, but it says that a main motion to approve policy. Wait a second. If a main motion to approve policy is not passed at such a meeting by a majority vote of board members voting and present. So the implication is that a majority vote of board members voting and present is what's required according to our policy adoption policy or procedure, which contradicts what the bylaws state. And that's not the only place where there's a contradiction. I think it's where the language is most clearly contradicted. But, supposedly this board runs by Robert's Rules of Orders, which is typically a majority-driven process. And just one other thing that I had noted when I was looking at it was within the bylaws themselves, it states that a quorum for the meeting, and I'll have to, I meant to look at it, a quorum for our meeting is 500 votes. So the bylaws themselves allow for a meeting to happen with 500 votes. But if we're constrained by the 2/3 majority to pass policy, then we could be having these meetings and yet unable to actually carry out one of our main duties if we're restricted by the 2/3. That's what I would say.
I believe that in the policy meeting, we determined that there were two. One was to change the bylaws, and the other one was to change regular policies. And that's where 2/3 was for bylaw change, and regular policy adoption was a majority of those present.
I believe what we've done is removed language that specifically said in the bylaws that in 2/3.
No.
It's on Article 4, voting number 2. It says bylaws are passed and placed into effect only when a minimum of 2/3 of the entire votes are registered in the affirmative. So that's to change the bylaw only.
And the old language for that said items of policy are passed and placed.
Right.
So that's the change.
That's the change.
That's the change.
It's been updated to reflect what we discussed during the first reading.
Any other discussion on the amendment?
So at the expense of sounding like a broken record, even though this is our second reading and we should probably have studied it. Some of us may have the time, some of us may not. The actual changes, I believe, at the second reading should also be noted so we can quickly get a refresher, if nothing else, if we read it 3 weeks ago and put it down and never came to it this time. I mean, I think I heard what Mark said was changed, but it still would be very useful to have them highlighted. These are the changes that will be adopted if this second reading is passed. How much consternation would that be to get some of us that read it 3 weeks ago back up to snuff quickly in 5 or 10 minutes before we roll? So what are the changes? Mark, can you?
Yes, I would be happy. That's what I was trying to explain, but frankly, I didn't do a very good job. Of course, I also don't have an old copy in front of me, so I'm basing this on memory, but in Article 4, number 2, that has been changed to replace items of policy are passed and placed into effect with bylaws are passed and placed into effect. Did everyone, Article 4, number 2? That is the change.
And 7? Wasn't 7 part of the change? Article 7.
I remember it correctly. 7,
Did that have to reflect the 2/3 thing, or was it that all the time?
so with this change, we would continue to require a 2/3 majority vote for changes to the bylaws.
So what was the change in the policy adoption procedure?
That was, I believe, adding the word weeks in C. It just said 2 and had meant to say 2 weeks.
That's right.
We also changed our address in the bylaws.
All right.
266 Williams Road.
Mike, would you like to read the amendment that we're voting on?
I believe a motion was made by Mark to approve the second reading as presented, the above policy, bylaws, board of directors, and policy adoption procedure. Second by Alyssa.
And the amendment was to,
That's
presented.
that's the amendment.
okay.
Is Alyssa okay with that? Right?
Yes.
She just said she's okay with it?
Friendly amendment, yep.
So we're voting on adopting. All right.
Yep.
So, all those in favor of the motion? Those opposed? It passes. Thank you. Anything else from policy?
Check my notes. I don't believe so.
Very good. Moving along, transportation had no meeting. Tri-county,
They had a meeting without me.
how dare they?
I can do a quick update. Just to put some names with places up there. Tri-County has 4 new employees. Ms. Marcy King will be the new graphic sound instructor. Nick Mullins is the new energy systems technology instructor, which I think energy systems was maybe more like a tech basic.
It was intro to
Yeah,
tech.
intro to tech, so now it's energy systems, has a lot more to do with electricity. Jay Philbrick is the new building trades, and Miss Beth Harding is hired as an educational technician up there. They've done some really nice jobs with some Perkins funding up there. We have one of the only commercial truck driving simulators. It was a $200,000 item that they got through Perkins money. I think it's state of the art where kids can actually drive down the road and back up and do all the things without damaging the vehicle through the simulator. And we are one of the only ones that have that simulator in the state. And I think they want to also do a little bit with adult ed on that, but I'm not quite sure. They've also just had some, when you get CTE funding, it comes through different amounts, because remember, everything that gets sent to them now goes through their budget, and we don't have much to deal with it anymore, unless they're under budget and we have to subsidize it. But they also had $40,000 for some supplies to support their programs, some industry standards to collaboration with our sending schools for $40,000. They got a Perkins secondary grant for some van and equipment purchases, so they've had a lot of infusion of some much needed Perkins and other grants, and that also helps them to reduce their budget to the locals if they can use that money. The Army National Guard was up there for the 13th and 14th. A lot of our students went through some of those stations. The CTE groups have met with both gubernatorial candidates. There was a Tri-County Technical Center career open house. That was the night of our meeting, which is pretty neat, that they had there was 4 or 5, like Sergeant was there, Timber was there, and a couple other buildings and trades people, but also they had schools there. I saw Umpy, I saw Husson, I saw Eastern Maine or Southern Maine Community College, where kids could also see what options there were for not only the trades, but also some continuing education if they so chose to do that. So the kids got a chance to meet employers, as well as some continuing educational opportunities. Pretty strong enrollment up there. It's in the 200s, I think, or more. A lot of our programs are full. EMT is a little bit low, but that's also because it's coming off a combination of firefighting and EMT. Combination for a 2-year program. And I think they're back to having the MACNA conference, which also is something where all the professional development for all the centers around the state get a chance to get together and talk to each other, who are, so all the industrial arts, the buildings and trades people can get together and talk about what they're doing, and all the culinary people can get together, so that's a pretty neat opportunity. And it's Tri-County's alive and well, and a lot of our kids are up there doing a lot of really fun, cool things.
I'll jump in because I got to go to the MACNA conference last Friday as part of the Eastern Maine side of it. And one of the things that I was really impressed with that's happening up here is they now have a public safety dispatcher program in that, with a couple of consoles that they're teaching the kids how to do this. And it gives them a huge step up. For example, the dispatch center in Penobscot right now is down 15 slots, which means mandatory overtime for good folks, and of course it's a high-stress job, and so they're really looking to get people in that can do that. And then part of what I was doing was looking at the bridges that go from the tech centers to the firefighting programs to Southern Maine and Eastern Maine. So that's all there, because a lot of the fire departments in the state are still hiring. And in about 2 years, they'll have another wave of retirements.
Any questions for Tri-County? Probably none. We'll move on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did.
Okay.
What's up with the airline? Are they moving, or?
I don't think there's any motion forward on that.
We didn't discuss the aviation one. I think
Waiting on insurance.
I think we really have to figure out whether there will be an insurance company that would dive into that. And I think I talked to you briefly about Next Gen, or Gen Air was going to come up from Southern Carolinas to do a big production of all the different skills, and it was going to happen in right around October, and it kind of fell through. We're going to do it again next spring. I think that will be a catalyst to see if this area, what they can, because the kids were actually getting permission to fly if they wanted to that day, which was an amazing opportunity for our kids, and I really hope it comes back around in May. But long story short is that I asked the guy, I said, we need to get in touch with somebody who's actually going to say, yes, we're willing to, and I think they must do it down there because these
Yes,
kids.
I know there's a school in New Hampshire that does it, so we need, and I told them that, so we need to get clarification from them.
We just need to find out,
Everybody.
because I think we have the infrastructure in place and people who want to do that program. And we would probably be one of the first, again, in the state, to put kids in the air, but.
I think truck driving is more accurate.
So it's kind of sitting there, but we really, I think the insurance piece is going to be the hurdle for that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Moving along. Nothing for negotiations, extracurricular, or pandemic, so we will move to new business. And with that, staff resignation. Can you just give us
Yep, we return Ed Tech 1, special ed in Coleman Street Middle School, Marcy Robinson, Ed Tech 1, Somerset. Julie Brown was our administrative assistant in special services. Rebecca Ethier, Ed Tech 3, special ed in Coleman Regional High. And Richard was a custodian. And the nomination is John Talbot for a social worker. We will need that motion.
all right, so staff resignations, it does not require a motion, but staff nominations,
We have John Talbot, social worker for district, and Nicole Lupo, 8th grade science at Coleman Regional Middle School,
can I hear a motion?
to accept them as a block.
I move that we accept these two staff nominations as a block.
Second.
Veronica and
Right.
Brian.
Any discussion? Paul?
What's the money? Hard to find a social worker?
It was very hard to find a social worker, very lucky, and he's coming in at 46,645, which is less than what he's making at his other appointment. He really wanted to be here, Paul.
Did you say it was?
46,645.
Okay then.
And
How about the other one?
she's brand new, 4195.
Certifications all.
Yes.
Any other? Good. All those in favor? Those opposed? It passes.
Yes.
Appointments?
Yep, Jennifer Hedman coming on board Ed Tech, special ed, Spassic Valley. Jessica Desert, 2, Ed Tech 2, special ed, EDS. Cynthia St. Laurent, accounts payable, accounting clerk. For Joe's department, it was Luann's. Kristen Clark is administrative assistant in special services, took Judy's place. David Dupre is a dishwasher stocker, and Stephen Day is maintenance. That's that part-time position. Derek Swanson at Tech 1, Coleman Regional Middle School, he was an add-on. And transfers, Tricia Bugler went from Ed Tech 3 to special ed. Title 1 at Sebastian Valley, and Terry McEwen went from a cook to a bus aide.
And this do not require a motion. Future agenda items?
Yeah, I don't know if this is a board discussion or if this is something that you need to address or what, but I've been hearing a lot of reports about the behavior of board members in the community, specifically people getting kicked out of sporting events, people on Facebook attacking principals and the superintendent, and having discussions with coaches that make them question whether they want to coach anymore. And it's not acceptable. It violates a lot of different rules of engagement for the board, and like I said, I don't know how to address it, but I can't go anywhere without having these discussions or jokes made, and so I'd like to have it addressed in the future. Thank you.
I would hope people who have problems with me would address them with me, and I'm not going to be on Facebook, so I'm never going to see it, so if they have something that they need to say to me, I would appreciate any board member directing it to me as a superintendent, because if I don't know about it, I can't handle it, and I'm not going to be on Facebook going to find it, so that message, I would hope. I've been telling you that for the last 6 years. If you make fun of me on Facebook, whether you're a teacher, an ed tech, parent, board member, I'm not going to see it. So Les takes a screenshot of it and sends it to me. But if you can't come to me and say something to me, then I can't help you. And so if people are out there, Ryan, saying stuff about me, please say, you need to go set an appointment with Mr. Hammer and let him know how you feel about something that he's done, because he's not going to find out about it any other way.
There was a mention, you were not setting up the table, and it was just before the board meeting started, and I mentioned the fact that we have, the only authority that we have is sitting around this table, unless we are appointed by the board to do some special project, and that we need to remember that, and it is something that we need to just refresh ourselves of, you know, every so often. And if there's an issue, we definitely want to address it.
Well, maybe I'll take care of it, thank you.
Any other future agenda items?
Question?
Yes.
We discussed previously about exit interviews. Have we got any more thought to that?
I give that a lot of thought, because I see all the resignations and people are just, again, I've told you this multiple times, a personal issue comes up and I'm walking out at 10:40 this morning. Happened today. I don't know how we're going to find an exit interview with that person. I have thought about it with potentially Jamie, who would be a person who's not an authority, you know. People are going to say something different maybe to Jamie, who's in human resource, than they are maybe the principal or, you know, a supervisor like Alicia. But I don't know how to put that on her plate and how to track that down. But have I not thought about it? I absolutely have. But I guess I see that people are, you know, we're making $12.75 as a custodian, and if I can go over to Pittsfield or I can go to Hamden, they're just going. I mean, it's a fact of life. They're not going to tell me they're unhappy with. I don't think they're unhappy with what's going on right here, because a lot of people will come back. Say, I didn't like it there, and they come back. I mean, you saw one on here tonight. Tried another town, two towns over, and didn't like it and came back. So it's not out of my mind. It's just how to make that happen, on some, put it in somebody's job description or way to make that happen.
Okay. Yeah. Anything else? We discussed the next meeting date, and the next board meeting, instead of November 8th, is going to be November 15th. The budget is going to be November 14th, but all the other meetings are the same. And without further ado, good night.
Is budget 6 or 6:30?
6:30. I'm not.
Do what I'm told.
I'm not.
Waiting outside.
Finish this, all this stuff.
Yeah.